She smirked at me across the office and said, "You know you shouldn't, right?" And just like that, everything I thought I knew about boundaries disappeared. The first time she walked into the office that morning, the room seemed to shift slightly, though no one else noticed. She moved with a quiet authority that wasn't loud or demanding, just present. Everything about her, from the way she carried herself to the faintly confident tilt of her chin, made people unconsciously step aside or lower their voices. And when her gaze landed on me for a brief moment, it was as if she saw not just the man standing there but the thoughts I didn't even admit to myself. I was running through emails at my desk when she approached, the soft click of her heels announcing her arrival before she appeared at my side. She held a folder, casually resting it on the edge of my desk, and for a fleeting instant, our fingers brushed. It wasn't intentional, at least I told myself that, but the warmth of her hand against mine lingered longer than strictly necessary. My chest thudded, and I quickly looked away, but the faint scent of her perfume, warm, floral, a little like vanilla and something unplaceable, stayed with me, curling around my senses in a way that made focusing almost impossible. Her smile was the kind that seemed effortless yet perfectly aware. It wasn't overtly flirtatious, at least not in the way one might expect. It was knowing, a small curve of her lips that suggested she understood far more than she let on. "You've been working late again," she said lightly, her voice smooth, calm, carrying a warmth that contrasted the sterile hum of the office lights. There was no judgment in it, only observation, and a subtle hint that she enjoyed noticing the quiet rhythms of my life, even the mundane ones. I wanted to answer, to comment on the late hours or the pile of reports on my desk, but words caught in my throat. There was a weight to her presence, something that made casual conversation feel loaded with unspoken meaning. And yet she didn't pressure me. Instead, she let that moment stretch just long enough for me to realize how aware I was of her, the way her hair fell across one shoulder, catching the morning light, the gentle shift of her weight as she leaned slightly closer to retrieve a pen I'd left behind. Then came the smirk. It wasn't provocative in a crude way. It was subtle, teasing, as if she had noticed the storm of thoughts behind my eyes and found it quietly entertaining. My own cheeks betrayed me, warming in response, though she made no comment, just held the moment, letting it hang in the air, charged and intimate without a single word. By the time she turned to leave, I was acutely aware of every detail, the soft swish of her skirt, the gentle sway of her necklace, and the lingering impression of her presence. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple, professional acquaintance. Something had shifted, quietly, imperceptibly, and I could already feel the tug of curiosity and desire that would pull me into the days ahead. It was only a few minutes, barely enough for a casual encounter, and yet it left me unsettled, aware, and inexplicably drawn in. That first brush with her presence planted a seed of tension that would not let go, a subtle, simmering intrigue that promised more than it revealed, and that, more than anything else, would shape every interaction to come. It started small, almost imperceptibly. The kind of closeness that could easily be dismissed as coincidence, but with her, nothing ever felt accidental. One afternoon, we were walking down the narrow office hallway, both heading to the same meeting. The space between us shrank naturally, almost as if the air itself drew us together. I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, subtle but undeniable, brushing against the sleeve of my shirt as we passed. We reached for the same door handle at once, our hands meeting briefly. Just a touch, nothing more, but the world seemed to hold its breath for that moment. Her fingers lingered an instant longer than necessary before withdrawing, and a small smirk played at the corners of her lips, just enough to make my pulse accelerate. I caught myself noticing details I shouldn't, like the smooth curve of her wrist, the way her nails caught the light, and the quiet confidence in her posture that made her presence feel commanding without ever being loud. Later, I found myself standing near her desk under the pretext of needing a file. She didn't flinch or step back, though we were close enough that the scent of her perfume, the same warm, floral note from that first morning, wrapped around me. It was subtle, barely there, yet it carried a strange intimacy, making me hyper-aware of the space between us. I could feel the soft brush of her hair as she leaned over to point something out on a document, the light pressure of her fingers grazing my hand. My own hand twitched almost involuntarily, reluctant to break contact, reluctant to step away from the quiet magnetism she seemed to exude effortlessly. Every glance she threw my way seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. A tilt of her head, a pause before responding, a small playful raise of her eyebrow, each movement teased at a connection deeper than the professional veneer we were supposed to maintain. I found myself reading into every gesture, wondering if I imagined the tension that hung in the air like an unspoken secret. Even in casual office interactions, her presence reshaped the room around me. Conversations with colleagues blurred into background noise. I was acutely aware of her breathing, the gentle rustle of her clothes, the quiet confidence she radiated. And yet, there was a warmth to it, a subtle comfort beneath the underlying tension that made proximity feel both thrilling and safe in a way I couldn't name. At one point, as she reached past me for a binder on the top shelf, our shoulders brushed. A flash of awareness shot through me, her warmth against my skin, the quiet steadiness of her movement, the faint scent that clung to her even as she pulled away. I stepped back, but only slightly, and she didn't retreat. Instead, she smiled that same knowing smile from the first morning, a hint of mischief and acknowledgement, as if she understood exactly what she had done to unsettle me. By the end of that day, I realized that nothing about being near her was casual. Every accidental touch, every brush of proximity, was charged with a subtle, undeniable intimacy. And though no words were exchanged beyond professional courtesy, the connection had grown in those small, almost invisible ways, a slow, quiet tension that promised that the ordinary rhythm of work life, the playful tension between us, began to take shape in moments that seemed insignificant to anyone else but carried weight for me. It started with subtle remarks, comments that lingered in the air just long enough to make me pause and wonder if I'd misheard her or if the meaning had been deliberate. One afternoon, as I struggled with a particularly stubborn spreadsheet, she appeared beside my desk, arms crossed lightly, eyes glinting with amusement. "You've been staring at that screen for an hour," she said, voice soft but laced with a teasing undertone. "Do you ever take a break, or are you trying to make me feel guilty?" Her words were innocent enough on the surface, but there was something in the tilt of her head, the slight smirk playing on her lips, that made my chest tighten. I stammered a reply, flustered by the ease with which she had disrupted my focus. And yet, her presence was magnetic, drawing me in, making me acutely aware of the faint warmth of her body near mine, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the sterile office air. These teasing moments became a pattern. She would comment on how I held a pen, the way I organized papers, or the slightly distracted look I got when she was near. Each time, her words were casual, yet they carried a weight that made me self-conscious in a way I had never experienced before. And in every instance, her eyes lingered just a moment too long, as if daring me to meet her gaze, daring me to acknowledge the unspoken tension between us. One particularly quiet afternoon, we were alone in the conference room, reviewing documents side by side. Her hand brushed mine, not intentionally perhaps, but with the kind of accidental intimacy that spoke volumes. She noticed my reaction, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Careful," she murmured softly, almost conspiratorially. "You know you shouldn't get distracted." It was impossible not to be distracted. The warmth of her touch, the proximity of her body, the way she leaned over to point at a figure in the report, all of it created a storm of awareness in me. I felt exposed and exhilarated simultaneously, aware of boundaries, yet powerless to ignore the magnetic pull she seemed to exert effortlessly. Even her laughter carried a teasing quality that wrapped around me like a gentle, intoxicating current. It was light and airy but lingered in my mind long after it had faded, echoing with the thrill of unspoken possibility. Each glance, each subtle gesture, each small, deliberate infraction of professional distance built the tension between us, an invisible thread that pulled tighter with every shared moment. By the end of the week, it was no longer accidental. I found myself anticipating her appearances, analyzing the tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the warmth of her presence. The playful teasing had become a language, a subtle dialogue we shared through gestures, glances, and half-spoken words, a delicate balance of desire, restraint, and understanding. And though nothing had yet crossed the line into anything more intimate, the emotional tension simmered beneath the surface, promising a connection that was as thrilling as it was forbidden. Would never feel ordinary again. The playful tension between us began to take shape in moments that seemed insignificant to anyone else but carried weight for me. It started with subtle remarks, comments that lingered in the air just long enough to make me pause and wonder if I'd misheard her or if the meaning had been deliberate. One afternoon, as I struggled with a particularly stubborn spreadsheet, she appeared beside my desk, arms crossed lightly, eyes glinting with amusement. "You've been staring at that screen for an hour," she said, voice soft but laced with a teasing undertone. "Do you ever take a break, or are you trying to make me feel guilty?" Her words were innocent enough on the surface, but there was something in the tilt of her head, the slight smirk playing on her lips, that made my chest tighten. I stammered a reply, flustered by the ease with which she had disrupted my focus. And yet, her presence was magnetic, drawing me in, making me acutely aware of the faint warmth of her body near mine, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the sterile office air. These teasing moments became a pattern. She would comment on how I held a pen, the way I organized papers, or the slightly distracted look I got when she was near. Each time, her words were casual, yet they carried a weight that made me self-conscious in a way I had never experienced before. And in every instance, her eyes lingered just a moment too long, as if daring me to meet her gaze, daring me to acknowledge the unspoken tension between us. One particularly quiet afternoon, we were alone in the conference room, reviewing documents side by side. Her hand brushed mine, not intentionally perhaps, but with the kind of accidental intimacy that spoke volumes. She noticed my reaction, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "Careful," she murmured softly, almost conspiratorially. "You know you shouldn't get distracted." It was impossible not to be distracted. The warmth of her touch, the proximity of her body, the way she leaned over to point at a figure in the report, all of it created a storm of awareness in me. I felt exposed and exhilarated simultaneously, aware of boundaries, yet powerless to ignore the magnetic pull she seemed to exert effortlessly. Even her laughter carried a teasing quality that wrapped around me like a gentle, intoxicating current. It was light and airy but lingered in my mind long after it had faded, echoing with the thrill of unspoken possibility. Each glance, each subtle gesture, each small, deliberate infraction of professional distance built the tension between us, an invisible thread that pulled tighter with every shared moment. By the end of the week, it was no longer accidental. I found myself anticipating her appearances, analyzing the tilt of her head, the curve of her smile, the warmth of her presence. The playful teasing had become a language, a subtle dialogue we shared through gestures, glances, and half-spoken words, a delicate balance of desire, restraint, and understanding. And though nothing had yet crossed the line into anything more intimate, the emotional tension simmered beneath the surface, promising a connection that was as thrilling as it was forbidden. After weeks of subtle tension, teasing, and accidental closeness, there came a moment that shifted everything. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, there were no confessions or grand gestures. Instead, it was quiet, almost fragile, a glimpse into her world that revealed vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. It happened one late afternoon. The office had emptied except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tapping of keyboards from a few stragglers. I was gathering files when I noticed her sitting at a corner desk, shoulders slightly hunched, staring at a blank screen. Something about her posture, uncharacteristically quiet and reserved, made me pause. "Everything okay?" I asked softly, unsure if I should intrude. She looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then allowed a small, tired smile. "Just thinking," she said, her voice lighter than her expression suggested. There was no teasing, no playful smirk, just honesty. Something in the way she spoke, the bare softness in her tone, drew me closer, not physically, but emotionally. Without thinking, I sat nearby, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. She didn't pull away. Instead, she exhaled slowly, a quiet sigh that seemed to release months of composure. She shared a small story about a personal struggle, something from her life outside the office, a worry or regret she rarely mentioned. It wasn't heavy or tragic, just human, a moment of imperfection in a life she usually carried with quiet confidence. I listened intently, aware of every detail, the soft inflection of her voice, the way her fingers absently traced the edge of the desk, the subtle shift of her gaze when she looked at me. When she spoke, I felt an unusual mix of awe and protectiveness, realizing that behind her graceful, confident exterior was someone complex, human, and quietly tender. At some point, her hand brushed mine, not accidental, yet not overtly deliberate. A light touch, just the tip of her fingers resting against mine as she gestured, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. My pulse quickened, but this time it wasn't just tension or desire, it was connection, recognition, the kind of intimacy that didn't require words. "I never really get to talk like this," she admitted, her gaze soft, almost vulnerable. "People usually see only the surface." Her honesty made me feel privileged and cautious at the same time. I nodded, offering quiet acknowledgement, letting her know I understood without interrupting, without judging. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, filled with unspoken understanding. The world outside that office seemed to fade, leaving only the subtle rhythm of our breaths, the faint scent of her perfume, and the gentle awareness of proximity. By the time she finally stood to leave, the atmosphere had changed. There was a quiet acknowledgement of trust, a delicate thread of emotional intimacy that hadn't existed before. That day, the playful teasing and accidental touches evolved into something deeper, a connection that hinted at what could be possible if boundaries were navigated with care, if emotions were honored alongside attraction. For the first time, I didn't just see her as captivating or intimidating. I saw her as a person who could feel, who could rely on me, even in small ways. And in that recognition, the slow-burn tension between us gained a new dimension, warmth, empathy, and the fragile promise of something meaningful beyond the thrill of proximity. The tension that had been quietly simmering over the past weeks finally reached a delicate, almost unbearable peak. It wasn't marked by a grand event or a dramatic confrontation, but by the quiet, magnetic pull of proximity, the kind that demanded awareness, careful restraint, and constant negotiation with one's own impulses. It happened during a late evening at the office. Most of the building had emptied, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of a distant keyboard. I was reviewing reports when she appeared, unexpectedly, carrying a stack of folders. Her presence was immediate, the soft sway of her movements commanding attention even without a word. She paused beside me, leaning slightly over the desk to set the files down, and the closeness of her body was impossible to ignore. Our hands brushed lightly as she passed a folder, and I froze for a moment, acutely aware of the warmth and subtle pressure of her touch. There was a pause, a fraction of a heartbeat too long, where either of us moved away. I could feel the faint heat of her body, the subtle fragrance of her perfume lingering in the small space between us, and the gentle tilt of her head as she observed me. She smirked, faintly, knowingly. "Careful," she murmured, almost teasingly. "You're aware, aren't you?" The words were playful on the surface, but the glance she gave me carried a deeper understanding, a recognition of the tension that had grown between us, unspoken but undeniable. My mind raced. Every instinct screamed that nothing should happen, that lines existed for a reason. And yet, every fiber of awareness in my body seemed drawn toward her, the warmth of her proximity, the subtle electricity in our accidental touches, the quiet intimacy of the moment. I stepped back slightly, a conscious decision to maintain distance, to honor the unspoken boundaries that had always guided us. She didn't retreat, didn't admonish me, she only smiled, a soft, almost approving curve of her lips that acknowledged both the restraint and the temptation. That small smile sent an unfamiliar mixture of relief and longing through me. It was a reminder that desire could exist without action, and that connection could be powerful even when carefully contained. For a long moment, we simply existed in the same space, two people aware of what they wanted and what they couldn't have. The silence wasn't awkward, it was charged, filled with mutual respect, understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement of moral limits. Every accidental brush, every lingering glance, felt magnified, each one a test of self-control, each one deepening the slow-burn tension in ways that words could never fully capture. When she finally moved away, leaving the office and closing the door softly behind her, I felt a strange combination of exhilaration and restraint. The moral conflict hadn't resolved itself. It was a quiet tension that would continue to shape every encounter, but there was a strange satisfaction in knowing that our connection could be electric, meaningful, and human without crossing the boundaries that kept it honorable. It was in that hesitation, in that careful dance between desire and respect, that I realized how deep this connection had become. The pull toward her wasn't just physical or emotional, it was ethical, intellectual, and profoundly human. And the awareness of what couldn't happen, of the lines we refused to cross, only made the slow-burn tension all the more intoxicating, all the more real, and all the more inevitable in the days to come. The tension that had been building over weeks, the teasing, the accidental touches, the playful smirks, the moral hesitation, finally found its quiet, intimate release. It wasn't a dramatic confession or an impulsive act. It was a moment of shared understanding that spoke louder than words ever could. It happened on a late afternoon, in the soft, golden light that filtered through the office windows. Most of the office had emptied, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. I was gathering documents when she appeared, casually leaning against the edge of my desk, a folder in hand. There was no teasing this time, no playful remark. Just a calm presence that seemed to fill the space around her, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. We worked side by side in silence for a few moments, the quiet punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and the faint tapping of my keyboard. Then, without warning, she reached over to adjust a stack of documents, her fingers brushing mine in the process. The touch was fleeting, light, almost incidental, yet it carried the weight of all the moments that had led up to it. The accidental closeness, the playful tension, the quiet acknowledgement of feelings that neither of us had dared to name aloud. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen before, a mixture of warmth, understanding, and a vulnerability that mirrored my own. It wasn't just desire or curiosity, it was recognition, an unspoken acknowledgement that what existed between us was real, meaningful, and significant. I enjoy this, she said softly, almost as if she were confessing to herself. Her voice was calm, low, and intimate, carrying the weight of honesty without needing embellishment. Being around you like this, it feels right somehow. I swallowed, feeling a surge of emotion that wasn't just attraction but a profound connection. I wanted to speak, to articulate the whirlwind of feelings inside me, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I nodded, letting the silence carry what neither of us could fully say. There was a comforting steadiness in that quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the bond that had been growing between us, slow and deliberate, over weeks of subtle intimacy. Her hand brushed against mine again, slightly longer this time, a light pressure that was both reassuring and electric. I felt the warmth of her palm, the softness of her skin, and the quiet steadiness of her presence. It wasn't a romantic gesture in the traditional sense, it was intimacy, pure and human, carrying layers of trust, desire, and emotional connection all at once. For a long moment, we simply existed like that, side by side, connected by something that transcended physical attraction. It was emotional closeness, a bond forged through small gestures, meaningful glances, and the patient cultivation of mutual understanding. The slow-burn tension had reached its peak, not with a dramatic act, but through this quiet confession of feeling, this acknowledgement of each other's presence, and the unspoken promise that the connection between us was real, profound, and enduring. As she finally straightened and returned to her work, the warmth lingered in the air between us. The office felt different, fuller, richer, infused with a sense of intimacy that didn't need to be spoken aloud. For the first time, I realized that this slow, careful dance of emotions, restraint, and quiet desire had reached a climax that was both satisfying and profoundly human. The days after that quiet confession were different, though nothing in the office itself had changed. The lights still hummed, papers still rustled, and the hum of printers and distant conversations carried on as usual. Yet, every time she entered the room, I noticed the subtle shift, the way she carried herself with a slightly softer presence, the faint smile she offered when our eyes met, and the unspoken understanding that had settled between us. Our interactions remained professional, but they were richer, imbued with a depth that hadn't existed before. Every brush of her hand when passing files, every casual touch when leaning over a document, now carried an added layer of meaning. It wasn't desire alone, it was recognition, warmth, and shared respect. I noticed the small ways she lingered, just a fraction longer than necessary, the way her gaze sought mine in moments of quiet reflection, and the gentle tilt of her head when she spoke. All of it spoke of connection without need for words. One afternoon, as I was organizing reports near her desk, she appeared, holding a folder with her usual calm grace. We both paused, aware of the quiet charge in the air, but neither broke the professional rhythm. Her hand lightly touched mine as she handed me the papers, deliberate but subtle, and I felt the warmth radiate up my arm. I smiled, and she returned it with that familiar, knowing look, the same one from the very first day, now layered with the intimacy we had cultivated together. "What a long week," she said softly, leaning slightly closer as she spoke, her voice carrying a warmth that made the words linger in my chest. "I'm glad we managed it." "Me too," I replied, meeting her gaze. There was a calm certainty in that exchange, a quiet affirmation of the bond we had nurtured. No teasing, no tension, just a shared acknowledgement of the connection that had grown slowly, naturally, and with care. Even as we returned to our work, the atmosphere had shifted. It was lighter, warmer, filled with a subtle ease that replaced the nervous anticipation of weeks past. The slow-burn tension had resolved not with dramatic gestures but with emotional intimacy, a shared understanding that we had something rare and meaningful, even within the constraints of the professional world. When the day ended, and she finally gathered her things to leave, our farewell was simple yet profound. Her fingers brushed mine in a light, lingering touch as she waved goodbye, and I felt a quiet, steady warmth that stayed with me long after she walked away. The fragrance of her perfume lingered faintly in the air, a gentle reminder of the human connection we had forged. As the office emptied, I realized that what we had created was something enduring. It wasn't just attraction or playful tension, it was a bond built on respect, understanding, and the patient cultivation of intimacy. The story of our connection, marked by teasing, vulnerability, hesitation, and quiet acknowledgement, had reached its resolution, leaving behind a sense of warmth, fulfillment, and the knowledge that our relationship, slow burn and carefully tended, was real and profoundly human. The office felt emptier without her presence, yet fuller too, enriched by the subtle, enduring imprint of our shared moments. I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we had established something rare, a connection that honored boundaries, celebrated intimacy, and left a lingering sense of fulfillment, ready to carry into whatever came next.